Good morning. So we are continuing our review of the essay I wrote to help us understand the context and also the continuation and completion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, at least as to the best of our ability. So I wrote a full essay that tries to piece together what the Rebbe Rashab most likely would have written had he continued. And we know definitely that he would have continued because there are questions and themes that he did not answer. So in this essay, which is posted on the WhatsApp group, we are on page 8, top of page 9, I believe. Let me see. Where are we here? Yeah, top of page 9 of this essay, if you want to follow along. So just to sum up, so in this essay, slowly piece together one step at a time. First, identifying the questions that were unanswered and the themes, the ideas that were not finished. Then a brief summary, relatively brief summary of the whole Hemshech Ayin Beis all the way till the end. And then taking the Maimer Hamagbihi l'Sheves from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, starting from the end, going backwards, to answer the question. The first question was answered was how the nefesh elokis affects the nefesh habamis to change its entire personality, which is the opposite of bittul, to get to a state of bittul. So that we discussed at length. We learned it inside the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, that after the long explanation of Yichudi Tata, Yichudi Lo, and the Yichud of both Yichudi Mishma, that leads us to V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. So after the explanation where the Rebbe Rashab stops, the Maimer Magbihi continues and says how that affects the Nefesh Habamis. The next question we addressed, going backwards again, is the koyach of the neshama atzma. The neshama has. Excuse me. How does the neshama have the power to achieve this? And the third, going backwards, is what is ner mitzvah, and what are the three components of the wick, the oil, and the flame in a mitzvah. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. So this essay is divided into chapters. We already finished chapter 1. We're now in chapter 2, which primarily addresses this question of ner mitzvah. And as I said, we began learning. Now, what is ner mitzvah? Ner mitzvah is the Ratzon Hashem that manifests in the physical object. That's the wick, the physical object, the wick. But the wick carries the Ratzon Hashem. Similar to the neshama, there is the divine soul. So it's divine energy within the soul that comes down into the body. That's the wick. But here the wick is the mitzvah itself, which is the Ratzon Hashem in the Davar Gashmi. And then that in turn transforms the Davar Gashmi, which is like the oil, not the Ratzon Hashem, the oil, into fuel that will create the mitzvah, the Gili Alakus, that a mitzvah accomplishes. Now, we didn't get into the three aspects we'll talk about more in detail, but right now we're talking what is ner mitzvah, is that manifestation of Ratzon Elyon that elevates the world, the physical world, and also has a zgula prati, has a zgula miyuchedes, a special quality and feature that to help also transform the animal soul. And we discussed how the neshama does this without a mitzvah, and then how the mitzvah adds to that. And that explains also, as the Alter Rebbe continues, why we put on talis and tefillin before davening, because since davening is about the bitter, the refinement of the animal soul, so the talis and tefillin, the mitzvah, the levush, is mamshech, the makif, that gives the strength to elevate something that before there's a halah, there should be a hamshacha. There comes a hamshacha, like he gave the example of the slingshot. In general, how a garment can elevate something higher than it would have been elevated on its own. And that's what a mitzvah does. So therefore, and we also discussed that the Alter Rebbe primarily addresses the effect on the nefesh habamis, because that's the main theme in the Maimer Magbihi l'Sheves, but later he does discuss how it also transforms the world. Right. So where are we up to now? As I said, we finished. We're middle we're on top of page 9. So we finished the topic of how makif ends up helping and elevating the makif of the levush of the mitzvah helps elevate the nefesh habamis and the world for that matter. And now we're going to start line 1, the end of line 1 on top of page 9. Now the Alter Rebbe comes to explain an interesting distinction. Why is it that in tefillah, every day we say the same tefillah? We don't change prayers. In learning Torah, every day you're supposed to learn something new. Obviously, you can review what you learned yesterday, but the real power of Torah is when you're constantly being mechadash. You're always learning new things, no depth, and so on. In tefillah, you say the same prayer. So he's going to explain the distinction between that based on what we just discussed. Now keep in mind, this is Ner Mitzvah, and then there's Torah So we're going to talk about Torah a little later in this discussion. But right now, he says, Ulechein hatfilahi, and just a small qualification, I've never really figured this out completely, so I'm going to teach it as best of my ability, and maybe you guys could help me figure it out. But I'm not, even though we've learned it many times in Torah and the Mittler Rebbe, but maybe now when we learn it together, it'll be easier. I'm just saying something I haven't fully understood. But let's read it inside. This is all the language of the Alter Rebbe, mind you. Remember, this is all the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Torah. So he continues. He says, Ulechein, after saying that tefillah is aliyas nefesh habamis, and before that, before tefillah, we start with talis and tefillin, the makif, that gives the power to elevate. So he says, Ulechein hatefillah hi nuscha achas b'chol yem, kol yemei chayev shel adam haksuvim loy. That tefillah is the same nusach, the same text that we say every day. We say the same tefillah. Like when you daven shachris, he's not talking about kavanah now. We're talking about the tefillah itself every day. All the days of a person's life that are designated to him, Yemesh Nasein B'hem Shivim Shana. It's a pasuk in Tehillim that says that the days that are given to him, 70 years, which is the average, and then it says Im B'Gvur Shmeinim Shana. So all those years, his entire lifetime, is exactly the same nusach tefillah. So the Alter Rebbe explains why. Kafi, because this is according to what he's given in tefillah, since he's elevating the animal soul, he's given the amount that's necessary to elevate the animal soul. Kafi netzutzes nefesh habamish etzrichen la'ales. So since the purpose of tefillah is to elevate the animal soul has a particular parameters. The animal soul is not infinite. We're going to soon talk about Torah. Torah is Daruch Meretz Midah Rechava Miniyah. Torah, you're learning Hashem's wisdom and will, and that has no end. But tefillah is coming to refine something, coming to refine the animal soul. The animal soul has a certain measure, has a certain amount, certain parameters, like he says, Shetzrichen lahales, a certain amount of sparks that need to be elevated. Mashenkin nefesh alikis, the Alter Rebbe contrasts. By contrast, the divine soul, he nitzchis. What does he mean by nitzchis? Is that it's forever and doesn't have any measure. It's an eternal force because it's a part of godliness. Nefesh habamis, on the other hand, has a particular personality, and once you refine it, you refine it. It's not an endless journey. It may be hard to refine and completely do so before Mashiach comes, but it's still, like he says, again, the words are, Nitzutzis nefesh habamish etzichen lahales. Whereas the nefesh alikis is nitzchis. B'kol yem nasa b'china chadosha. And every day, you refine another level of these nitzutzis, a new level. So bottom line is, tefillah, he's saying, is one entity, all there in order to refine the animal soul. Obviously, you can't refine it in one day. So you're given your lifetime, the lifespan that you have, all those days, but you're saying the same tefillah because you're refining the same animal soul. And every day if tefillah is proper, you're refining another part. So therefore, the tefillah is the same because the tefillah is attacking the animal soul, and every day is a b'china chadasha. V'tzarich lahalis. Let's continue, and then we'll try to explain what it means. Lahalis gam eisei nitzuz shen mischadish, and he has to also elevate also that nitzuz that was renewed. V'akol hi halo achas, and all this is one elevation, and hence one nusach, one tefillah, like not one prayer. Obviously, every day is another prayer, but the same language. So this is what leaves me unclear. What is he saying here exactly? If he said that it's one body of sparks, the fact that he says every day is a new spark, so then seemingly, why don't you have a new tefillah, a new nusach? And at the same time, he's saying it's all part of one halah. So that's what's unclear to me. But he's definitely saying is, let's just sum up again what the Alter Rebbe is saying. And I'm happy to hear if anybody has a good explanation. Just give it thought, because I gave it a lot of thought. So it's not just an obvious explanation. We need to get into it. But he's saying clearly that the tefillah is one nusach all your life, according to the netzutzis of the nefesh habamis. Means nefesh habamis has a number of sparks. Let's say it's a million sparks. Those million sparks divide by the days of a person's life. Every day you refine another one of the sparks that you have to elevate. So that's the first thing. What does that mean? That every day you refine a new spark, meaning not the same spark that you did yesterday. Is that what it means? That's most likely what it means. And then he says, and you have to elevate, which seems to suggest that he's refining two things. That which he did yesterday, he's repeating, and he still has to do the new nitzitz, and all of it is considered one halah. So one halah makes sense. It's one body called an animal soul. Animal soul has many parts. You can't do it all in one day. So the Eibishter said, I'll break down the nefesh habamis into parts. Just like you have to lift, let's say, a very heavy weight. Not lift a heavy weight. I'm sorry. Let's say you have to carry a heavy weight a few miles. You can't carry it all in one shot. So the Eibishter said, every day you'll carry a little of it, and that's the tefillah of that day, elevates that part, and by the time you finish, he says shivim shana, but let's say mei ve'eshem shana, you'll have finished and carried that weight all the way to the destination. In this case, you have finished the birur. So that's a halah achas. It's one aveda that just breaks down into parts. What I don't really understand is the nitzutz chodosh aspect. Why does he have to add that? Let's say he didn't say nitzutz chodosh. So as I'm speaking, it sounds to me that it means to say every day a new nitzutz, because if you're carrying the weight in the example I gave, the same, every day you carry it the same place, you're not going to get anywhere. So every day there has to be an additional element that we're adding to it. So that would mean, even though you're saying the same tefillah, because it's all part of one long aveda, it's not different avedas, it's one big aveda, halah of the nefesh habamis, but each day is a new aspect of that birur. That's the way I would explain it. So actually, when I say it now, it makes sense to me. It's just the language threw me a bit. What means nitzutz chodesh and what's the halah? And what does he mean at the end? So it could very well be I just explained it properly. It's just the language is a little, not that it appears otherwise, but the language is a little, especially the second when he says, let me just look, I'm looking it up, I'm looking at it again. When he says, Finisusis habamis, that's fine. But then he says, V'tzorech la'ale is gam eisei nitzutz semischadish. What's the gam? So I'm assuming he means that every day you have to add and focus. Like, let's say the nefesh habamis is made up of 7 midas, from chesed to malchus. Like we refine it during the Sfiras Eimer. So Sfiras Eimer is one entity. That's why every day we say the same bracha. The only difference is it's a different day. So every day is a different part of the nefesh habamis. One is chesed, chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed. So every day is a nitzutz chadash. Chesed shebechesed is not gvura shebechesed, but it's all part of one halah, one animal soul from chesed through malchus. Is that what he means here? It's very likely that's what he means.
Yeah,
maybe the language. And
I
maybe the
think that you're
language is,
right.
let me just finish. Let me say, maybe the language. So if that's the case, then I stand corrected, even though I said that I didn't fully, but now that I'm speaking it out, it sounds that's what the pshat is. The question is, does it fit exact words, or do the words mean something more than what I'm saying? So I'm stopping now. Please comment if you like.
I think that it sounds right the way that you're saying it now.
Yeah. Now that I talked it through, like Sfiras Se'emer works very well. Because every day is another aspect of the Nefesh Habamis, but it's still one Nefesh Habamis. It's not a different birur. It's the birur of this Nefesh Habamis that you were given your whole lifetime, and you have now so many days in your life to be Mavarer. And every day we say the Nusach, but it's a different nitzutz of that Nefesh Habamis.
I want to know if there is a special halacha or the teaching when you can focus, consciously focus on something when you pray. When you start prayer, you know where you have to emphasize.
Yeah, but let's address that afterwards. It's not really what he's discussing here, right here. I want to focus on the meaning of the exact words of the Alter Rebbe. And
yes,
I don't want to go into understanding how you pray. That's not what he's discussing here. He's talking about why you say the same prayer every day, and so that's what the focus is. I'm not clear how what you're saying is directly connected to that.
I have a question about the use of the term miskadesh, as if it says this essentially the same spark that renews, as if you refine a spark, but let's say I don't know, it comes back because let's say you sinned or something like that.
That's exactly what I'm asking. That's why I'm saying the language here seems to add something that I've not covered. That's exactly what I was asking.
And I'm just wondering if it's like the inyan of sin, like, if you every day,
not sin.
Well,
it sounds like I said, the Nefesh Habamis is made up of sparks. That's clear. And every day you have to cover another spark. So that's what he means, Mischadish. The Oisei, I'm not sure whether he means what we usually mean when we say Oisei. The content that I just said definitely makes sense. So it's one Nefesh Habamis, one Halah, that is made up of a lot of components, like I said, Chesed, Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed. But the exact language, I can't really know if there's more to it. I looked, of course, the Mittler Rebbe Maimer, because he discusses as length as well. And I didn't see anything there that helps understand this component, this aspect. So frankly, for right now, for understanding what he's saying here, I think we have enough. The exact language, there may be more, there may be not. It could just be a language issue. He's phrasing it a certain way, and we're reading maybe too much into it. That's very possible. It doesn't necessarily change the Havana, because it still remains this point. As long as we have the answer to the question why tefillah every day is the same nusach, then we've covered what we needed to cover here. So that's what I would say here. If someone has a suggestion of something more in these words, by all means. But I'm pretty satisfied right now after reading it and explaining it. And kafinu tzutzis nefesh habamis. So Sichel has that makes a chesed through Malchus. Let's say. I'm just reading it. That's actually the one that every day means another birur, another nitzutz is being this bada, like the chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed, okay? But tzorich lahal is gam eisen nitzutz semischadish. I think he means in addition to any other birur that you're doing, you have to also cover all the nitzutzes. In other words, let's say the second day of counting the Omer, you decide you still want to focus on Chesed, you still need to cover Gvura Shebechesed. Because if you don't, you're not going to have the birur of the Nefesh Habamis, the whole entirety. That's what I think he means. That you need to also cover the new birur of that day. But the new birur is not a new tefillah, it's all part of one halah. So it's the same prayer on a new day. So it's basically the same prayer, the same nefesh habamis on a new day, meaning a new nitzutz. That's what I think he means here. Okay. In other words, if it was a different nefesh habamis, then you could say, okay, there should be a different prayer. But here's the same nefesh habamis, the same halah. Like I said, you're elevating the same entity, just a different piece of it. So that's why you have every day a prayer. Because you could also say, why not just say one prayer all your life? But then you're not covering the nitzutz chodesh. Because every day you need to cover another nitzutz. There's another thing that maybe comes into play, which I don't want to get into because it's a little complicated, where Chassidus talks about why we daven every day. Why can't you daven one day for 2 days? So Chassidus says, because Zman itself needs to be refined, and today's spark is not tomorrow's. And tomorrow's is not today. So it's not just you're repeating the prayer. It's also every day has its particular birur. So it could be he's hinting to that also, the nitzutz chodesh of every unique day. But it's the same prayer and the same nefesh habams. That's the key thing. Okay. Are there any other questions? Are there any questions? Anything else you want to add to this? Okay, this is tefillah. Now let's go over to Torah. He's now going to contrast that in the parentheses. Mashenkin limudat Torah, he says, when it comes to learning Torah, you don't learn the same Torah every day. Sorech dafke lilmid b'chol yom davar chodesh. Every day you have to learn something new. It says la foshaba. Obviously, you can, as I said before, you can repeat what you learned yesterday. But the mitzvah of Torah is every day to learn something new, not to learn the same thing every day. But he doesn't explain what's the difference. The difference is because Torah is not about birur of the nefesh habamis. Torah, as we're going to learn soon, is Eir. It's about Gili Eir. The Gili Eir of Elokus. Whereas Tefillah, and here this case is the elevation of the nefesh habamis. So since Torah is Eir of Ein Sof, Eir Eliki, so Eir Eliki, every day can be a completely new Eir. It should be a completely new Eir, and that's why you learn something new. Tefillah is coming to tackle an existing animal soul that you were given, was delegated to you and allocated to you to refine in your lifetime. You have one nefesh habamis, which, yes, has many parts to it, and that's what you need to refine. So that has a certain focus and a certain one halah, whereas in Torah, it's constantly new hamshachas. That's the most likely meaning behind that. I believe the Mittler Rebbe talks about this maybe more. I have to look it up. I think, I don't remember right now. Well, let's see if we get there. Okay. Again, let me stop for any questions because this is very dense. The Alter Rebbe has many ideas. They come right one after the other. And I want to make a little break between them to make it easier to understand. So if we're all clear, I'm going to continue. We're fine? Okay. Ulechein. Now he continues and says like this. Ulechein, kol ha-mitzvos nikros b'shem tzedakah. So now the Alter Rebbe introduces yet another topic. That's why all mitzvahs are called with the name tzedakah. Remember, mitzvahs are the levushim that have a special zgula to elevate the animal soul. So that's also why the mitzvahs are called tzedakah. Ki tzedakah terei mem goy. So you'll find a number of places when you say tzedakah, you mean all the mitzvahs. You don't just mean charity per se, but all the mitzvahs are referred to as tzedakah. Because it says tzedakah terei mem goy. Tzedakah elevates the nation, the people. Why? When a person is kind, tzedakah, charity and chesed, benevolence and kindness. She'esin lamata, that through the tzedakah and chesed that a person does below, meaning when we help another person through tzedakah and chesed, lahachis ruach shvalim, to sustain and give life to the spirit of the downtrodden. So shvalim are people who are down. They can be either due to poverty, whether it's financial or otherwise. So when you give tzedakah, what are you doing? You're elevating and you're giving them life. That's the expression. Lahachis ruach shvalim. V'oni choshev kemes. And a pauper is compared, the Chazal say, to a dead person. So when you give tzedakah, you're bringing to life, you're sustaining and bringing to life someone that's considered like the opposite of life. So that's the tzedakah terem geshadei tzedakah islan lachidis. Kain v'yesem kain le'en kates nimshach ruach chaim l'mayla. So everything is midah keneged midah. What we do below, in turn, is done to us. So, and even more so, le'en kates, infinitely more, is nimshach ruach chaim. When you give tzedakah, you give chaim to someone, you give life to someone down below, you in turn get so much more, the spirit of life, from the life of life, from the source of all life. Lahachis mesim mamish, that it will give you life. It gives the person who's done tzedakah. When you give life to someone else, Hashem gives you life. Mamish like lahachis mesim. Obviously, you're not physically dead, but it's like rejuvenating and invigorating a person as if you're resurrecting them. Which is a yemin mekareves. Yemin mekareves means with your right arm, you bring someone close, you embrace them. V'yeminoi tichapkeni mamish. And your right arm, tichapkeni, you embrace me, you hug me, mamish. The pasuk says, Smeli tachas l'reshi v'yeminoi tichapkeni. So yemin mekareves reflects on the idea of being embraced. So this clearly is what is an embrace? That's makif. So when you do tzedakah, so this is why all mitzvahs are called tzedakah, because mitzvah is makif. And how you mamsheh, when you do a mitzvah, and a mitzvah is tzedakah, so what does tzedakah do? Just like you give life to someone else, so Hashem embraces you, which is his mamshech, the makif, Hashem al-maila, l'reimem, tzedakah tereimem goy, to elevate you. When he embraces you, he lifts you up. Lahales is a nefesh l'mayla mayla, and elevates the nefesh higher. But Erein So Baruch Hu mamish into Erein So Baruch Hu, v'zeu inyan ner mitzvah. And this, the Alter Rebbe concludes, this is the inyan of a ner mitzvah, at kan l'shenei. All this is the exact language from Teira'er, the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and Hamagbihi l'sheves. So what do you see from this? He said before that mitzvahs have a unique power to elevate the world and to elevate the nefesh habamis, because they're makif, and a makif is like an embrace, and now he's explaining that's why it's called tzedakah, because it's doing exactly that. It's embracing you, but also elevating you. So without the mitzvah, the neshama could achieve things. We spoke about that before. The nefesh halikis has power. But imagine with a mitzvah, you're now drawing down God's embrace, the makif from above, that elevates us. So the addition, which he doesn't say this here, but this is one of the reasons we also give tzedakah before we daven, just like we put on talis and tefillin. So it's all part of preparing and helping the nefesh halikis to elevate the nefesh habamis. So now, in addition to ner Hashem nishmas adam, we now also have the ner mitzvah, specifically through talis and tefillin, and in general mitzvahs. That's what they accomplish. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. Relatively, it's brief. It's one paragraph. And explaining Ner Mitzvah. So we already have now what the Rebbe Rashab says, what is Ner Mitzvah? And he never answers. Here's the answer. Alter Rebbe says it explicitly. I'm going to explain this a bit more in the next paragraph, but let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. So to elaborate a bit more, this is the addition shal ner mitzvah al ner Hashem nishmas adam. Because in Ayin Beis, it's very clear that he doesn't just want to understand what ner mitzvah is, he wants to know what it adds to ner Hashem nishmas adam. Since this is a candle, the soul is a candle, and the mitzvah is a candle, so what is the hisofa? So the hisofa is exactly this. The mitzvah helps elevate it to another level, because the mitzvah The neshama itself doesn't have the power of the mitzvah. It has the power of godliness. It's a godly soul. But the mitzvah is Ratzon Elyon that helps elevate everything. Like he said, the Zgula Miyached is the special quality it has to elevate the animal soul. The makif, like the slingshot, the garment that elevates, like we just said now, the garment, the makif that elevates like the embrace. So when you do mitzvah, Hashem in turn embraces you and elevates you higher than you would have been on your own. Tzedakah, Terei Mem Goy. Tzedakah elevates. Ulahoyir, and I'm pointing out here now, Mebite meratik ba'abir b'teira ersham. There's a very unique, you can even say startling expression in Teira Er a little later in the beer, page 39D. 39D. He says these words: Ein neshama b'lei mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe says this language. A neshama, there's no neshama without a mitzvah. Meaning a neshama needs to have a mitzvah. Kiloi ama oretz chosid, because an amoretz can't be a chosid. V'loi bur yorichet, and a bur, a person that's how do you translate bur? A ignoramus, you could say, but it really doesn't mean ignoramus. A bur is like someone that's empty, hollow. Shtik holz, like a hollow, like a dumb piece of meat, a piece of wood. Yarichet cannot be someone that really is afraid of sin. So in other words, you could have a neshama, but if neshama does not have a mitzvah, it's lacking a fundamental aspect. And the same thing the other way around. V'gam mitzvah b'lei neshama ein a klum. This is the Alter Rebbe's language. And a mitzvah without a neshama is nothing. Ki kol ha'emer ein li ela teira, because anyone who says, I only have teira, afila teira ein le. So as a person says, I have teira, I don't need anything else. No, you have to have also mitzvahs. Gamach, sometimes the loshen. So you need also that. So they basically, ulechein tzarech li yesh gam shneim. And that's why you need to have both. You need the neshama ner Hashem nishmas adam, and it's complemented by the mitzvahs. V're'ei sham lamed ches gimel. Okay, I cite. Go look there on page 38.3. It talks about it as well. Yutag beperek haba shel harazu, which will be cited. I'll be citing it in the next chapter of this essay. Okay, so that concludes the Alter Rebbe's version of what a ner mitzvah is, what it adds to the neshama, and of course what the neshama adds to the mitzvah. Now we're going to go into the Mittler Rebbe. How does the Mittler Rebbe explain all this? Obviously much more elaborately, and this is going to be quite an extensive, well, relatively speaking, a whole bunch of sections, a lot of details of what mitzvah really is. So you see here the work of the Mittler Rebbe's Bina compared to the Alter Rebbe's Chachma. The Alter Rebbe said it in around 8 lines. The Mittler Rebbe, we're talking here probably 100 lines, not more. So we will be going over that next. But let me stop again if there are any questions. It's all clear? Okay, good.
The when he says "Ein neshama below mitzvah," we learn that every Jew does. There's no Jew without mitzvahs, right? It's not a statement; it's a possibility that you could have a neshama without mitzvahs, or it's a statement. Ein neshama below mitzvah.
It's a statement.
So every Jew does have mitzvahs. It's not saying that it's possible that you could have a neshama without mitzvahs. Then it goes on to say "Kilo amar tzchasi v'lo bora yerachet," which means it could be the second part of the sentence indicates that it seems to say that it could be that you could be an Amar Aretz or a bor without a mitzvah.
Well, the fact is there are people who are in the category of an Amar Aretz. How do you explain that?
That's what my question. I mean,
you don't need that. It's a question on Torah Er. Why don't you just look up all the Maimorei Chazal, that hundreds and hundreds of statements that say there's a thing called an Amar Aretz and a bor. It's not Alter Rebbe's original idea. How do you explain that? How would you explain that?
I would say that in Chassidus teaches us that there's even an Amar Aretz and even a bor has its mitzvah. Every Jew
are they called an Amar Aretz in Torah or not?
I would say it's like what we say about a tzaddik. Tanya, the definition of a tzaddik in Tanya is different than the
That's what you would say. In other
Yeah.
words, you don't think there's such a category called an Am Haaretz?
That does not have any mitzvahs?
Well, you tell me.
I don't think so. I think we learn it so much. Every Jew is full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate, and every Jew has. There's no Jew without doing the mitzvahs.
But there is a Jew called an Am Haaretz. So how do you define an Am Haaretz?
I would just say it's a level showing that
well, let's start with this. Are there Jews in history that never learned a word of Torah and know nothing in Torah?
Yes, but they still have a mitzvah of tzedakah.
Well, that's not what we're saying. I just said Am Haaretz doesn't know any Torah at all. Is that possible?
Yes.
It is possible. You also could have a situation where a person in any active way, you don't see any mitzvahs that they're being done. You could say you could be malamet zchus, but there are people who don't do mitzvahs. I mean, it's very hard to imagine because even if you say thank you to someone and you give a little charity, you already did a mitzvah. But
say he has children.
You could give a scenario where a person is a Rasha Gomer and never does any good deeds. In Tanya, he talks about a Rasha Gomer, a Rasha Varale. There is a hypothetically that what Chassidus would say, they still have a nefesh alakis, and somewhere, like you say, Malay mitzvahs karimin. What does that mean? Yeah. So there's a lot of explanations what that means. It means that there's like a rimen, the mitzvah doesn't affect them, the mitzvah is not in a practical way. But there are people that you could point to. We don't know what's going on in people's private lives, but there is possible for a person to have almost no mitzvahs in a revealed way. There is such a thing. And there are people who do a lot more mitzvahs. So
almost no mitzvahs, but they do. There's nobody.
Okay, but where do you see here that he's saying this? That he says ein neshama b'lei mitzvah. He says that.
Okay,
neshama cannot be existent without a mitzvah. Anyway, what are we discussing here? Are there people that don't do mitzvahs? Yeah, unfortunately, there are many. You could say it's because of tinuk shenishba. It's not a judgment. We're not judging anyone here. The fact is, the Torah itself says there are 4 categories. How do you explain the Daled Minim? That the Arova doesn't have Torah and doesn't have mitzvahs. The Esrig is Torah and mitzvahs. The Lulav is Torah without mitzvahs. The Hadassim is mitzvahs without Torah. Right? There you have the Lulav is Torah without mitzvahs. The Arova is no mitzvahs, no Torah. How do you explain that? Because there are people in the world that are scholars. It's called a Talmud Chacham. Not every Jew is a Talmud Chacham. There are many that are Amaratzim. As far as mitzvahs go, there are people who do many mitzvahs, and there are people who it's hard to find, unfortunately. Today, because of Tinuk Shenishba, this again is not a matter of judgment or whether they are responsible or not. Listen, a person who grew up and never heard about anything about mitzvahs and grew up completely devoid of it is not responsible. But that doesn't mean that, that they have the mitzvahs. Now, technically speaking, it's hard to imagine someone that's not done at least one good deed in their lives. Even Hitler did a good deed, I'm sure, in his life. Yamach Shemoy. So it's hard to imagine that. But you could definitely see different categories of people that are quite extreme, different. And there is the category of Amar, Kal Shebekalim, Poishi Yisrael. I mean, even there where it says they're filled with mitzvahs, it's still called Poishi Yisrael. You don't call them tzaddikim or Baalei Tshuva. Anyway, the point is, this is not semantics. It's just the concept. Yes, it's hard to find someone without a mitzvah, but there is the idea, a category in Torah that talks about someone that does not have mitzvahs. But even there, you'd say because he has a neshama, the neshama ain't neshama b'lei mitzvah, which could also interpret that every neshama. That's the reason that we are not. It's not enough to just have a soul. Remember, the Alter Rebbe's point here is that you need to have mitzvahs, not just a neshama. Just to say I have a soul and I pray in the morning is not enough. That's why you need talis and tefillin, and you need mitzvahs. Because a neshama is not complete without a mitzvah. Now you could say every neshama ultimately will do a mitzvah. Fine. But that's not what he's addressing here. Here he wants to say that in addition to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, you have to have Ner Mitzvah. What you're addressing is a really different topic altogether.
Okay.
That's what he wants to say here, that a neshama must have a mitzvah to really be able to, I guess, to be complete. Right. Or whatever you want to say it. Or he says, Ein neshama b'lei mitzvah. I did say it's a strong language. Maybe he actually means that a neshama without a mitzvah is not a neshama. Maybe he's really means it literally too.
And what about the second part of that statement? V'gam mitzvah below neshama ain't a klum.
Okay, because
How could you have?
if you think
How
about
could you have it without a
how could there be a
neshama?
mitzvah?
Every Jew
Because a
has a
mitzvah can't be
neshama.
performed without a neshama.
That's what I mean. So gam mitzvah below neshama ain't a klum. So there's no such thing as without a neshama. How could you say below neshama?
I don't know what to say. This is not a linguistic class. This is a content. The content wants to say that a neshama cannot be without a mitzvah, and a mitzvah cannot be without a neshama.
Okay.
And you need
That I
both.
got.
Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom and Ner Mitzvah. You need both.
Got it. If that's that, okay, that I can understand.
So if a person
I
says,
was just getting into the detail here.
I won't do any mitzvahs, I have a divine soul, and that's all I need, the answer is no, that's not enough. And vice versa. If someone says, I don't need a soul, all I'll do is a mitzvah, however you explain that. Yeah. Okay.
The real question is why, well, I mean, this is slightly off target. It's dafka on the words, but what does it mean? Why does the neshama need a mitzvah to exist?
Well, first of all, who says it's to exist? Maybe it's to just be, to be able to be realized. You know, it depends how you teach ein neshama b'lei mitzvah. If you say ein neshama doesn't exist without a mitzvah, then your question is valid. If it means ein neshama b'lei mitzvah, neshama is not able to be what it's supposed to be, can't be realized without a mitzvah, then it's a different. Depends how you interpret that expression.
Yeah, it must mean the latter, right?
I could see a way of explaining the former too, but again, what are we getting at here? What are we trying to establish here? I'm trying to focus on the understanding of it. You know, I don't think the Alter Rebbe wants us to go ahead and try to speculate and what we call it, try to imagine a scenario of a neshama without a mitzvah. That's not where he's going here. Not trying to say that. He's trying to say that Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom and Tefillah is not enough. You need to have mitzvahs. Ein neshama b'lei mitzvah. He is using, that's why I said, bitui meratik. It's a very, very unusual expression. There's no question it's unusual. That's why I pointed it out, that it's unusual expression because it opens us up to hold this whole discussion. Now, you could hypothetically say that when God envisioned the neshamas, he envisioned Torah and mitzvahs at the same time, and he didn't envision one without the other. You could put it that way. And then a neshama does not exist without mitzvahs. In other words, when we say Bereshis b'shvil Yisrael b'shvil Torah, God envisioned two things: neshamas and Torah mitzvahs. So in that sense, maybe it doesn't exist one without the other. But on the other hand, we do find sometimes that neshamas are higher than Torah mitzvahs, like we learned from Tanit Ve'Elyo. So it gets a little more, if you want to really start analyzing it, to go into more details, you know. Like you could say, a neshama will always lead to a mitzvah. You could put it that way. That it's not possible that a neshama exists without a mitzvah. So it'll always lead to a mitzvah. So he's not giving us a hypothetical of a neshama without a mitzvah. He's saying a neshama cannot be without a mitzvah.
That's right.
That's what I thought it meant.
That's what I thought.
But you know what? To me, really, however you like, all above. You know, to me, the bottom line is we have to come away with what his point here is, that you need both. That's why he says the listen, look at the language. He says the main point is, tzarich liyas gam shneim. It's the bottom line.
Why can't we say, Rabbi Jacobson, that if we're saying that we're chelek mamash, we're part of Hashem himself, and mitzvot are basically Hashem's will, Hashem ratzon, then by definition, it's part of our being. Whether we realize it by doing it and actually exposing and revealing the mitzvah or not, that's a separate issue. But the point is there within us.
You could say that, no problem saying that. The question is, what does the words ein neshama b'lei mitzvah mean? Maybe
because
it's what you're saying.
Because it's interwoven. Like we're part of Hashem, that's Hashem's will, it's part of us. Now, the fact that we do it, obviously, we're revealing it, but in a hidden level, but etzem, it's part of us.
That's completely acceptable. It's, I think, part of what we're trying to say, yeah. Okay, good. Anybody else want to weigh in? What's interesting with the proof that he brings, Lo Amoritz Chassid, Amoritz usually refers to not bat mitzvahs, it refers to Torah. No, it's to say someone without Torah can't be a Chassid. But he's using it here that someone without a mitzvah, the neshama is not a neshama without a mitzvah. And Lo Bur, okay, Bur you could say is more someone that's unrefined. In other words, the opposite of Amoritz here he's saying is a mitzvah. Okay, it means Torah mitzvahs. In other words, a neshama that just says, I'm a holy soul, but they don't learn Torah, they don't do mitzvahs, they can't really be a chassid, can't be a yorechet. Yeah, okay. Can't really be committed if you don't have commitment. It's like when they say, I'm a Jew at heart. I'm a good Jew at heart, but I don't do anything about it. You don't act on it. That is the problem. That would be a problem. Okay, good. So continuing on, so now after the Alter Rebbe, that he goes now, we're quoting now from the Mittler Rebbe. But my More Admura Amsoyisham. So in the same discourse of the Mittler Rebbe, Yesh Bezeh B'inyan Mitzvah Arichas Habir. There's a lengthy explanation from the bottom of page 390 to the page 402. So we're talking about 12 pages. What the Alter Rebbe said, just as I said earlier, a short paragraph, is the Mittler Rebbe a longer Arichas. In order to make it easier on the reader, hitakti tamsis shal nekudis ha'ikris sham. I cited a summary of the main points there in the Mittler Rebbe. And I broke it down by number here. You'll see here, I think there's 8 or 9. How many numbers are there? 8, 7, 1 second, 6, 7. Yeah, I believe there's 10 points that I made. Yeah. This goes for quite a few pages now. So this is a pretty long summary of the Mittler Rebbe explaining their mitzvah, basically unpacking what we just learned from the Alter Rebbe in detail. So I broke it down into, again, I think, what did I say, 10, 11? Yeah. 10 points. So we'll start now and we'll continue as we go. So here we are. One, Hagimel Dvarim B'ner Mitzvah. The 3 components in Ner Mitzvah. Psila, Shemen, V'er. The wick, the oil, and the flame. So this is all language of the Mittler Rebbe, and you'll see at the end of every paragraph I give the page number where it's from. In Yedua Muvur L'mayla, Mittler Rebbe writes, it's known and it was explained above, Shagama mitzvahs nikr b'shem ner, k'meshakasav ki ner mitzvah. Mitzvahs are also called a candle, like it says in Ner Mitzvah. U'lechera ein zeh muvan. And seemingly this is not understood. The mashayich in ha'maisa the mitzvah b'peil mamash shetikra b'shem ner dafke. Why would you call a maisa of mitzvah, which is an action? You're putting on tefillin. You're eating a matzah. You're lighting a candle. Why would you call that a candle, a flame? So we need explanation why mitzvah is called flame. You could say it's a Maisa Mitzvah, you're doing God's will. Umashma, the Mittler Rebbe says, from this appears, sheyesh b'mitzvah gam ken gimel eila. That in the mitzvah there's also these three components. Psila, v'shemen, v'oir. A wick, oil, and flame, fire, light. V'oir hu oir de Torah. And he says the oir of the mitzvah is the light of Torah. V'shemen hu adover shanasa by a mitzvah. And the oil is the object with which you're doing the mitzvah. Shelekeach midvorim gashmim de datzach dem tzameach chai. You're taking physical objects from the mineral or vegetation or animal world. And vayideh hamamutza de psila. And by the interface of the wick, shin nishmas adam canal. Here he's teaching the wick as the neshama of the person, not as the Rotzna Elyon, like he explained in Ayin Beis, just for the record. Hari Hashem and Kola be'er. So these are the three things. The Eir is the Eir of Torah. The Shemen that creates it is the object that you're using, and is the Psila, the Neshama, that takes the object and does a mitzvah with it, that turns the oil into the Eir HaTorah. So the Shemen, Kola Ba'er, the Shemen gets consumed or absorbed Ba'er into the fire, into the flame. Kamoshi is Ba'er, and I write Besif 8 de Lahala. So this will be explained later in number 8 in this continuing essay. So this is all from bottom of page 390, 391. That's point number 1 from the Mittler Rebbe. And I'm going in order here. Just thinking, where should we stop here? Let me see. Each one has a headline. So point number 2, the power hakoyach shel ner mitzvah lahales ulahamshel kedusha al yena b'yeser. You remember from the Alter Rebbe, he said, Asher kedushanu b'mitzvesav, that a mitzvah has the power to draw down a higher level of holiness than it was there in the first place. That's why we say, even a neshama says, Asher kedushanu, you sanctified us with your mitzvahs. If a neshama is already sacred, why does it have to say it's being sanctified? Because a mitzvah draws down a higher level of kedusha, from kedusha sa'atzmus b'neshama elikis, into the divine soul. So as great as the divine soul is, the mitzvah draws down a higher level of kedusha. And this the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, is now going to explain in detail. I think I want to stop because I don't want to start a whole subject and then get stuck in the middle somewhere. Let me just see a second. Let me just see something here. This is a relatively longer piece. So my vote is that we should continue this tomorrow.
I think so too. Can you take questions before you terminate the class?
Yeah. I'm going to stop here. We'll take questions, and then we'll continue tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, go for it.
I have a question on the first point. You kind of glossed over, by the way, in Ayin Beis he teaches the three elements of the candle or the light differently, because in Ayin Beis he says the psila is the mitzvah itself, and here he says the psila is the shama. That's no small switch. I mean, they each are useful metaphors. They bring out different meanings, but what's the original intent? Seems like it would be what's written here, unless the Mittler Rebbe teaches it both ways himself.
Okay, so first of all, it's not uncommon that you find different explanations in different places, even those that may be sourced from one to the other. Secondly, I would wait to see, because the Mittler Rebbe does interpret it several ways later. So this is not uncommon, especially the Mittler Rebbe. Very often will explain something in a number of different ways.
Okay.
There's no contradiction in content. Yeah. It's just a matter of how you explain it. But the idea is still the same, that a mitzvah has three components. The question is what those three are. So it's really more of a technical difference. Not in Havana, still being mamshich ratzon elyon
Yes.
into a physical object through a person. So that's either way. And if you look in the Ayin Beis, he does say the wick. I think he says is the ratzon elyon in the dover gashmi. Here he says the wick is the neshama that does the mitzvah. So again, in Havana, it doesn't really change much because again, you have all those components at work. But in interpretation, you will find, especially the Mittler Rebbe, he brings sometimes different explanations.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, my friends? Okay. So we're going to stop here. Let's see. What page am I stopping on here? Page. I closed it already. Do you have it? Anyone has it in front of them? What page are we
Page
on?
9. Still page 9.2.
Okay, page 9. Okay, fine, good. Okay, I see it here. Yeah. So page 9. And
The middle of 2.
what?
No, we just started. He read the headline of number 2. He just read the title. He didn't go into the explanation.
Yeah, I just read the title.
The heading.
Yeah, 'cause it's relatively long. I think it's easier to wait till tomorrow. Okay, so I'll stop here, middle of page 9. Good. Okay, I think this is going pretty well.